I've got two key questions for you. First, I want to ask about what you're learning at this NARUC conference, and it's especially tinged, I guess, because you won't be attending one as the chair or the vice chair again, maybe in other capacities. And then second, we'd like to ask for some technological predictions.
Okay.
So first, even though this is your sixth, it's definitely my first national annual conference, your sixth. What are some of the key things that you might not have learned had you not had the opportunity to be here?
Well, I think the result of a number of the conversations that I've been involved in and a couple of the panels that I've sat in is that, and I hate to say it, but in a lot of ways, when we talk about resource adequacy and meeting capacity needs, things are maybe worse even than I thought coming in, and that the challenges are more widespread. We certainly have been focusing on those challenges in the Western region. We've known for some time how serious it is there, but I sat through a panel yesterday where they're talking about possibly shedding load to gas customers in New England if the weather gets too severe. And Arizona's up against some real challenges in terms of meeting their demand for natural gas. So we've got issues not just in the West, but literally all over the country. And there are no silver bullets or easy answers at this point to address those issues.
I think as a society, we tend to assume that we've solved the problems of in a wealthy culture such as we have. We tend to assume that we've solved the problems of easy availability of energy. Sometimes it's expensive, but it's at least available. Are you saying that we shouldn't have that assumption?
I think that we as a nation have a history of being reactive rather than proactive. We are sometimes at our best when we're responding to a crisis. That's not necessarily a good thing,
right,
but it's I think where we're at. As I talk to folks, I don't think there's a broad understanding or awareness of just how precarious our position is in terms of resource adequacy in this country, and I'm afraid that it may be a situation where we're going to have that crisis to motivate us. I characterize the discussion this way, that picture a graph, and this point on the graph is the current resource stack and carbon footprint. There's no arguing about that. It's what it is.
That's the resource stack.
And over here, at some point, that resource stack and that carbon footprint is going to be down here, totally different.
Right.
And the question that we're dealing with, especially as regulators, is can we have a controlled glide path from A to B, or are we going to let forces that, in my view, are to a great degree emotionally driven, force us to a cliff and a crisis partway through? Right now, my fear is the cliff and the crisis folks are winning. We are making decisions about baseload generation and resource adequacy that simply aren't based in reality. That's what I told somebody the other day. The only thing missing from this conversation today nationally is reality. Everything else is great. But
it's a big gap then.
It is.
If you're missing reality. I'm curious about the predictions that you would then make. Our theme is disruptive technology and regulation here at this conference, and I think that there's an optimistic thesis that we can solve these problems with technology. We can solve these problems with better monitoring the grid. We can solve these problems with new interconnection technologies. Of course, there's new generation of renewables that are in the future. Do you think that technology offers the chance to solve some of these issues if we're proactive? And then getting into that, what do you think the next 5 years look like for the crisis that you predict?
Well, I really am an optimist, and I really do think that we ultimately will, in fact, work our way out of this situation. I'm concerned about the timing, as I've expressed, but I think we're going to see a number of things. If you want some predictions,
I do.
I think 15 to 20 years from now, we're going to look at the current penetration of wind and solar into the market and say, that really was a transitional energy source, that it is not the source that's going to be the long-term answer for us.
Big question then.
I think that we are going to see just quantum leaps forward in technology on the nuclear side. I think that ultimately is going to be a huge part of the answer. We've got a situation in Montana where we have 2 coal-fired units in southeast Montana generating about 1,500 megawatts, a lot of power. Um, and we are having discussions just conceptually about retrofitting those units with SMRs, and the industry folks are saying that it can be done by 2035, and that we conceivably could preserve that baseload generation, and in fact make it carbon free. Now, there are folks that want to shut those assets down by 2025. There is nothing on the board to replace 1,500 megawatts of dispatchable generation by 2025. It just, and that's not, that's just a fact. It's just a fact. Yeah, it just, there's nothing to replace it. So what does that leave as an alternative? Unfortunately, you get to the point where there's one tool left in the toolbox, and that's called shedding load. And again, I'm not suggesting, I want to make clear, I'm certainly not saying that Northwestern's about to shed load.
Right, no.
We're not saying that. But if we get into that dire situation where there's that kind of shortfall of available capacity, that's the tool that's left, is the point that I'm making. And even MISO is talking about that possibility if everything goes wrong at once.
I've got two final questions then. First, for those of us that are working on trying to collect data that comes from regulation, what are some of the most important data sources? And then I want to ask if you've got any final thoughts for our audience. And our audience is many of the commission staffs that weren't able to join us in person here in New Orleans for the NARUC conference, and then also regulated utility staffs are tuning into our webcast as well. So I want to ask for final thoughts for them. But then, so first, what are some of the regulatory data sources that we're going to need to track this transition, and what should companies like H-Data be thinking about doing?
Of course, everything that comes, nearly everything, there's of course some trade secret stuff that's protected, but generally speaking, everything that comes to the commission with regard to a rate case for a utility is public information that's readily available through certainly our commission, and I would guess most. This organization, the NARUC, is a wealth of information, and they love to respond to those requests of,
some people like responding to information.
What's going on here, and how do I find this, and what's so those two, your state commission and NARUC. If you can't find it through those two sources, I don't know where to send it.
Sounds good. I want to ask for our H-Data team to slot our next speaker in, and while we're working on that, final question or final request for your thoughts. What would you like to leave our audience with? Those that weren't lucky enough to come to New Orleans in person, but are tuning into the webcast. Anything else you'd like for them to know?
I just kind of leave this overarching thought with y'all, and that is that almost without exception, public policy that's driven by emotion ends up being bad public policy. We have a huge emotional component in this argument that's being waged today in terms of how rapidly we're going to make the transition to renewables from traditional sources. We need to step back, take a deep breath, and let some reality come into that discussion so that we don't create massive unintended consequences. And I'm afraid we're on that track right now if we don't take that deep breath and step back.